So, Tom is going to talk about nutrition and humanitarian emergencies and novel fortified blended foods. He's a senior lecturer of nutrition at the University College in Cork. He's going to speak about his work to provide food fortified with important vitamins and minerals for young children caught in humanitarian emergencies. He attended the UCC as an undergraduate student, and he graduated with a BSc in Dairy and Food Sciences in 1980. Subsequently, he received his PhD in nutrition at Cornell University and worked as a postdoctoral student at Cornell until 1987. After a period with the U.S. multinational in the U.S. and Belgium, he took up an appointment as lecturer in food and nutritional sciences at University College Cork. He spent the last 29 years teaching extensively both food sciences and nutrition, including a module on human nutrition in the developing world. He's been the recipient of the President's Award for Teaching Excellence. His main research interest has been in many aspects of food sciences and also in nutrition in the developing world. He's worked closely over the past years with his colleague in life, Noah O'Brien, who he met at Cornell and who you're going to hear from tonight. So please join me in welcoming Tom to his talk with us tonight.
Thank you, Peter, for that introduction and for inviting both myself and Nora to come here to the US. Because coming to the US is something we love to do. We both lived here for 8 years back in the 1980s and returned home together, having met here. Our first child was born here, actually, so he's actually a US citizen, Irish citizen. He's now 30 years old. We had a second child in Ireland, and they're grown up and gone. And one of the pleasures of working in an academic environment is when your children grow up and go, you have a whole load of other young faces to look at, as you get older yourself, Now, everything I'm going to talk to you about today, I worked with Nora, because Nora and I have been together now 35 years, and we've worked very closely as a couple. We both have a similar background. I'm a year older than Nora. I look about 25 years older, but we both have undergraduate degrees in food science. We both did PhDs in nutrition in Cornell, and one of our great interests over many decades has been human nutrition in the developing world. Now, we both work on other things as well. But that has been an abiding interest for us. We've taught in that area for many years now. We teach a module, as Peter outlined. And we've also done research. Now, Nora's going to talk to you later about a project we did together in Ethiopia. But I'm going to talk to you about a current project we have ongoing. It's a 4-year project. We're about 2.5 years into it. And it relates to nutrition and the development of what are called fortified blended foods that are used by the World Food Programme and other humanitarian agencies. But before I do that, what I want to do is give a brief kind of an overview and background to undernutrition in developing world countries, particularly among small children and lactating and pregnant women, young women, because those are key groups, as I'll explain. So I'll go through a background on the current situation, the kind of targets that have been established by international agencies, United Nations agencies for the next number of years, up to 2025, 2030. And I'll explain, the underlying causes that cause a lot of these undernutrition problems among small children, and the long-term solutions and also the kind of interventions that you do in the short term, like fortified blended foods in an emergency situation. So what I'll do is I'll start first by looking at the state of play with respect to undernutrition in the world, and I'm going to show you some data from a report that came out in 2015. Now I'll show you more recent data in a second from the most recent report. from 2017. Now, this report has been produced for many, many years now, every year on an annual basis by the United Nations, primarily led by the Food and Agriculture Programme, FAO, and they've documented the levels of undernutrition in the world, in different regions of the world, going back for several decades now. But the 2015 report was a very important one because 2015 was a target year. I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that 2030 is the target year now for the Sustainable Development Goals. But 2015 was the target year for the earlier goals, the World Food Programme, the World Food Summit goals on hunger, and also the UN Millennium Goals with respect to hunger. So we'll see in this report, how did the world do over the 20-year period, or more than 20-year period, from the early 1990s until the end of 2015? And the short answer is it did okay, you know. It did okay. There were two targets. The first one was to reduce by half the total number of hungry people in the world by 2015. And you can see there at the baseline, there were almost 1 billion people that were hungry. There were 991 million people that were undernourished, which meant they had unreliable access to sufficient food to maintain a healthy and active lifestyle. The target was to get it down to about half of that. However, in terms of the number, what's very important to bear in mind is that in the early 1990s, there were about 5.5 billion people on the planet. By 2015, that had grown by 2 billion people, gone up to about 7.5 billion people. So, you know, we still made progress. We went from about 990 million down to about 780, but that's against the background of a very big rise in population, you know, so that is progress. So probably a more realistic metric is to look at the percentage of the world's population that had become food secure between the early 1990s and the 2015 deadline. You can see that's the lower line. You can see the target there is the dotted line, and this is the actual achievement. So it went from about 23.3%, about a quarter of humanity there, not that long ago, the early 1990s, almost made the target, about 12.9%. Now that's progress, you know, but unfortunately that progress has been very uneven. Some areas have vastly exceeded both targets. Other areas, unfortunately, have gone backwards, okay? But most areas have actually made progress. And when we look at that, you'll see there that some areas, even sub-Saharan Africa, went from about 33% food insecurity at the beginning of the period down to about 23%. Saudi Asia is an important area, because that's mainly India. And there are actually as many people in India as there are in the whole continent of Africa. I'm sure you're aware of that. So what happens in South Asia and indeed East Asia, where, you know, China, where there are actually more people currently than there are in sub-Saharan Africa, have a huge bearing on world statistics. Saudi Asia has made some progress, but, you know, for an affluent enough region, it could have done better, you know. Eastern Asia has made spectacular progress. That's primarily China. And you can see there that they went from 23% down to less than 10%. They've actually exceeded the targets, which is really good, you know. Southeastern Asia has made even more spectacular progress. That would include countries like Vietnam. Nora and I were in Vietnam there just before Christmas. And Vietnam actually, at the beginning of the period, in the early 1990s, had almost half the population were food insecure. They've got that now down to about 10%, you know, which is spectacular progress in just over 2 decades. You know, it shows that this can be done given the right conditions. Unfortunately, Western Asia has gone backwards. It's the one area of the world that's gone backwards, and it primarily relates to conflicts in that region. And Latin America has made progress. So overall, the picture isn't total doom and gloom. There is progress being made, you know. And one of the key things, like I'm going to talk to you about nutrition, but one of the key determinants of your nutritional status is your economic status. If people come out of poverty, their nutritional status will improve. So let's take a look at Asia, East Asia, as an example. In 1990, this is the numbers of people below the poverty line at the US 190 per day. And you can see there was nearly 1 billion people. But look at it now. It's gone way down in the space of 2 decades, 2.5 decades. And that has made a dramatic impact on nutrition. Okay? So getting people out of poverty And as you can see in the Sustainability Development Goals that I'm sure you're all familiar with, the first one is end poverty. The second one is end hunger, and they are interlinked. So, and these are the goals, as you can see, no poverty, zero hunger. Now I'm going to mainly focus on the zero hunger one because these are the goals now for the period up to 2030. Now in 2016, the UN agencies didn't publish a report for the first time in many, many years because it was the first year of the new cycle. But the new report then was published in 2017. It's called now State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World. And unfortunately, when you looked at it for the first time in a long, long time, the numbers started to creep up. Okay, we went from 777 up to 815 million people that are now undernourished, and the percentage went from about 10.6 up to 11. And that's worrisome. And if you look at the over 800 million people now that are undernourished, almost 500 million of them are actually in countries where there's ongoing conflict. And there's a clear relationship between conflict and war and disruption and ongoing hunger. Okay, and this is very worrisome. Now the key messages are there. It's hard to read those, but you can actually download this report from the FAO website. But the key point is that the numbers have gone up. Most of the reason the numbers have gone up is related to conflicts. But the other key thing is that the United Nations agencies now up until 2030 are going to look at other metrics besides just food insecurity. For decades they have looked just to see are people food secure or not. Okay? Now there's going to be a focus as well on women and small children. And the reasons for that will unfold as I discuss with you. So you can see they talk about issues relating to stunting, which I'll describe in a minute, in children. They talk about wasting in children, and they talk about micronutrient deficiencies like anemia, for instance, in women. Because there's an understanding now and a final recognition by UN agencies and international groups in general that you really need to focus on the nutritional status of women and children if you want to improve things in the longer term. Okay? So, now, I used a couple of terms there, stunting and wasting. Let me explain what those are. They're very simple concepts. Stunting is basically a child whose height for their age is too small. Okay, so if you had a 4-year-old child, you'd expect them to be in a certain height category. And if they're too small, they're stunted. Okay? Wasting is where you look at a child's weight. Okay? Its weight for its height. Okay? And wasting means they're too thin. They're way too undernourished, and they manifest that by becoming very, very thin and emaciated. Okay? Now, these are key nutritional issues, stunting and wasting. And the reason they're key is because there's a huge recognition now that stunted children and wasted children suffer lifetime disadvantages. Okay? It affects them throughout their entire life course. So you need to really focus on trying to reduce the levels of stunting and wasting across the planet, which are extraordinarily high, as we'll see. Okay, now of course the other issue that we've dealt with in the West for many decades now is the rise of overweight in children, and that actually is starting to become a problem in developing world countries as well, the rise of overweight with greater urbanization, globalization, and so on. All right, now as I said, we're worried about this because if you look at the risk of mortality from both stunting and wasting in children, it's extraordinarily high. You know, if you look there, you can see that even moderately wasted children have a 3 to 4-fold risk of mortality over a given period of time. For stunting, it's 1.6 to 2.3. If they're severely wasted, now incidentally, the way wasting is categorized is the World Health Organization has basic growth curves, and if you're more than 2 standard deviations below the average, you're moderate. Okay, if you're more than 3 standard deviations below the average, that's very severe. Okay, and you can see there, for many children, then can be both stunted and wasted. And if a child is both stunted and wasted, their chance of dying is actually very high. It's 12-fold higher than a child that has normal growth characteristics. So this is a very serious issue, and this now has finally got the recognition it deserves at international level. Okay, now why are we worried about this? Well, this again relates to the key issue that if a child is stunted, it probably will never catch up, it'll probably never recover, okay? And there's this cycle now that's well recognized that undernutrition basically manifests itself through multi-generations. If you start out with a small baby, a full-term baby should be about 3.5 kilograms. If you were born 40 weeks gestation, think how heavy we are. 3 kilograms, about 6.5 pounds, 3.5, about 7.5 pounds. That's fairly typical in a Western country, right? A low birth weight baby is a full-term baby, less than 2.5 kilograms, that's about 5.5 pounds. Okay? Less than that is a small baby for full term. Now, if you have a small baby like that, who is likely to be born to an undernourished mother, incidentally, that child is at higher risk of dying. That child will have reduced intellectual capacity, okay? And that child, very interestingly, if it survives and gets to adulthood, is actually at risk of chronic diseases 6, 7, 8 decades later if they live that long. There's very compelling data showing that. But unfortunately what happens is these children are very often born in situations of poverty and they never catch up. They become stunted. Their growth becomes stunted. Their height for their age falls more and more behind, okay? And a stunted child, not only are they physically stunted in terms of their height, but there's very compelling evidence that their intellectual capacity is stunted as well. So that condemns them to a life of poverty as well, most likely. You know? So this is a serious issue, and that continues through adolescence. If it's a young girl, a young adolescent girl, and she becomes pregnant, you know, she perpetuates the cycle, and you start all over again with a low birth weight baby. So this needs to be broken. This is the real target in nutrition for the next, decades, up until the 2030 agenda and beyond, to try and reduce the levels of stunting, okay, as a key target, okay? And the key to do that is to look closely and try and intervene to improve the nutrition of mothers and indeed small children, okay? And this is the new agenda in nutrition. And the concept of this 1,000 days, I don't know if you've heard this term, the 1,000 days. The first 1,000 days in a child's life, beginning at conception, up to the child's second birthday. So if you have a 40-week gestation, that's 280 days. The second birthday then brings it another 300, and 2 times 365 is about 770 or so, or 730. You add 730 and 280, that's approximately 1,000 days, okay? So the first 1,000 days in a child's life is crucial. If the child is undernourished during those 1,000 days, there's a high probability that they'll be stunted, there's a high probability they'll never catch up. And that's why nutrition now is focusing so much on mothers and small children. Pregnant women, women that are thinking of getting pregnant, to try and improve their nutritional status so that the gestation goes well for both themselves and the infant, and then the child in the first 2 years. This is crucial, okay? And you can see the problem. The problem is that at the moment there's about, these are most recent data there from UNICEF, about 155 million stunted children in the world. That's about 22-23%. Nearly a quarter of all children are stunted, which means their height is too small for their age. About 52 million children are wasted, which means their weight for their height is too skinny. They're too thin. They're undernourished. Okay? So these are serious issues. Okay? That's a lot of kids as well. That's nearly 8% of children on the planet. That's about 1 in 12 children are severely wasted or moderately wasted. This is what stunting looks like. Stunting is hard to see. You can see there, these are Guatemalan children there, and they're 9 years old, the top picture. 9-year-old Guatemalan children, and the line is the average kind of height you'd expect a 9-year-old child to be based on the World Growth Charts for height. And you can see all those children are much smaller. Okay, that's significant stunting, and they never catch up. Okay, The lower one is Guatemalan children living in the United States, where they have good nutrition, good sanitation, clean water, good health care, good education, all the things that affect nutritional status, and you can see they're fluctuating around the average. Okay? That's stunting. Okay? That's what stunting is. And unfortunately, as I said, it manifests itself as well in intellectual impairment, intellectual capacity. You know? Now, it's a big, big issue. Where is it a big issue? Well, it's a big, big issue in Africa. You know, 31% of Western Africa, 32% of children, 36% in Eastern Africa. Even in India, you know, this area. India is now that I've been in India, it's a lot of wealth in India, you know, so, but there's still a huge level of deprivation and poverty and very high levels of stunting in India, you know. Overall, globally, 22.9%, okay? That's nearly a quarter of all children. And you can see there, because most of the world's population live in Asia, you know. Asia, as I said, there's more people in India, or almost as many people, or there are actually slightly in excess people in India as there are in all of Africa at the moment. So whatever happens in India has a big impact on world statistics, and you can see there, in terms of global numbers of stunted children, 155 million, 61 million of them just in southern Asia, mainly India. All right, wasting. Wasting is where the child is too thin. The child is way too thin for its height, okay? And again, you see significant levels of wasting, extraordinarily high levels of wasting actually in southern Asia. Shocking high, you know, 15%, okay? Much higher actually than what you'd find in sub-Saharan Africa, where it's around 7, 8%, that kind of range, you know. Overall, about 8%, 7.7% there you can see is the global average. That's about 1 in 12, 1 in 13 children. Okay, and we've gone through these data. Now, these aren't the only nutritional problems that occur in children, and indeed in women and in general. There's a huge level of what are called micronutrient deficiencies. Okay? And the key ones would be iron, which is by a long country mile the most important micronutrient deficiency. And then you have other ones like vitamin A, zinc, which is listed there, iodine, and these have very significant impact as well. Okay? Now, incidentally, we're only a few generations removed from that. These were actually very prevalent in countries like Ireland, in countries like the United States, if you go back, even back to the 1920s, 1930s, you know. These were quite prevalent, you know. Why? Because we were much poorer, you know, much poorer. We're only like 2, 3, 4 generations separated from what you see in the poorest part of the world. We should never forget that. Now, these are the new targets. So what are the new targets? For years, the targets at UN level and WHO, FAO, and so on, were to reduce food insecurity. Now, that's still really important, eliminate hunger. But there's a recognition now you've got to move beyond that. And you've got to look at things like stunting. So try and get the baseline that were about 162 million stunted children. Try and get that down to about 100 million by 2025. Maternal anemia, which is a shocking problem worldwide, from about 29% to 15%. Low birth weight children, get that way down from about 15% of children to about 10%. Overweight's a separate issue. I won't talk about it. That would take long number of lectures. Infant and young child feeding factors, breastfeeding, Nora will talk about that later. But to improve that and improve the wasting figures, that's where the children are emaciated, too skinny, from about 8% down to less than 5%. So these are the new targets, and they move beyond the old target of just getting people food per se. Okay? Why? Well, why is because, and why do we need to look at this? Well, basically, it's been known for a long, long time that there are many factors you have to address if you want to improve nutritional status, not just food. You know, we think that if you give food to hungry people, you solve their problems. You solve one of the problems, but you don't necessarily improve their nutritional status, because nutritional status is impacted by a whole range of other things. For instance, if you look at this conceptual framework where ultimately at the top you want to have good nutritional status, a key thing is the basic structures of the country that the children and the adults live in. If there's political turmoil, political corruption, the institutions of the state don't work or work very poorly, like the education system, the healthcare system, the infrastructure in the country, you're fighting a serious uphill battle, right? Because those impact on key things like food security resources. Is there sufficient food available for all members of households across the country to have a healthy and active life? Caregiver resources. Is the education system good? Do people have the wherewithal to give knowledgeable care? Is the health status good? Okay. Control of resources, very important thing that relates to gender equality, gender issues, which are very big issues. And finally then, a really important issue, the whole health-related area, availability of basic health care, and crucially, something called WASH, W-A-S-H, which is water, sanitation and hygiene. Things we take for granted, clean water, proper toilet facilities, hygienic kind of living environment. These have a huge impact on nutritional outcome as well, because these impact on food security, these impact on quality of care, these impact on the environment, the healthy environment. So those two impact on health status, and these two impact on dietary intake. And if you get it all right, you will ultimately have a population where the vast majority will have good nutritional status. Okay? So there's no point just focusing on food alone. There's a lot of other things you've got to focus on, as we'll see. Okay? You need to, if you want good nutritional status, you have to have food security, you have to have a sanitary environment, you have to have adequate health services, and you have to have knowledgeable care, which involves education. Particularly for women, because women very often are the major caregivers for children, and that involves gender issues, giving women opportunity. And the same idea again that these all interact. Now this again is very prevalent in development thinking in the nutrition area at the moment. Now there's two sets of interventions. I want to move on now to the kind of area that Nora and I are working on currently. I want to put it in its context. There's two kinds of interventions to improve nutrition. There are what are called nutrition-specific interventions, and then there are what are called nutrition-sensitive ones. Now nutrition-specific will relate to the kind of stuff we'll talk about, that if a child is undernourished and it's anemic, okay, what do? Do you sit back and try and fix the underlying reasons, or do you deal with the immediate problem in a humanitarian situation? Well, ideally you try and do both. But you certainly need to deal with the immediate situation, perhaps by giving the child a fortified food, which is the example we're going to talk about, right? But that doesn't solve the big problem. The big problem means addressing the underlying conditions, and that means nutrition-sensitive interventions. So just to look at what I'm talking about, there's a lot of stuff here. For instance, the nutrition-specific interventions would look at adolescent health and preconception nutrition. So for adolescent girls, try, if they're going to become pregnant, try and make sure they're well nourished by supplementation programs and so on. Dietary supplementation in mothers, fortification, dietary supplementation for children, which is where we come in with our fortified blended food that I'll talk about in a minute. Whole range of things. Those are nutrition specific to deal with immediate problems in real people. The underlying things are really important as well, perhaps even more important in the longer sense, to improve agricultural productivity, to have a focus on early childhood development, women's mental and physical health, women's empowerment, really important, child protection, education, water, sanitation. That's the real solution. And remember we mentioned there a few minutes ago how countries like Vietnam have really improved those things in remarkable fast time. This is the reason why. Because they've got this right, In Southeast Asia and China, Asia, the areas of the world where huge progress has been made is where there's political stability. It might be perfect, but it's political stability. It's a hell of a lot better than war, and they have a chance. And having traveled the world many times over the course of our lives, people are the same everywhere. If they get the chance to fix things, they can do it quick. But they need political stability. They need good governance. They need an absence of conflict. With that, you can fix things very quickly. And these are the kind of nutrition sensitive interventions. All right, now of course the opposite of all that is where you have conflict, war, environmental issues like droughts, floods, and so on. And this is a big issue, okay? This is a big, big issue. Now, again, the United Nations does excellent work in one of their operations involves a famine early warning systems network. I have the website there. I accessed it there on the 7th of March. And it shows the areas of the world where there's actually what they call acute food insecurity. In other words, you're heading towards almost famine-like conditions. Now, currently there's no famine anywhere. There was actually a famine declared there earlier in 2017 in South Sudan, but things have improved slightly. They have a system called IPC, that's the Integrated Phase Classification System. If you Google it, you'll find all about it. It's how they basically aggregate levels of food insecurity, and IPC Category 5 is a full-on famine. Okay? Currently no countries in that, but a lot of countries are in Category 4, which is a major humanitarian emergency. And if you look, where are those countries? Well, Haiti, okay, ongoing problems in Haiti. Guatemala, El Salvador, you know, run by the drug cabals now, pretty much. Total disintegration of the countries, unfortunately. But most of the problems are in sub-Saharan Africa and, of course, here Afghanistan. Yemen, where there's a bitter civil war at the moment. Somalia, which is a failed state, total. Southeast Ethiopia, Nora will talk about her work there later. We were there in several years ago, 2014, 2013, 2012. It was terrible. It's gotten much worse because now they have a severe drought and there's major ethnic difficulties in that part of Ethiopia, ethnic cleansing issues and so on. South Sudan, a terrible civil war ongoing at the moment, absolutely brutal. Democratic Republic of the Congo, total disaster, going back for decades. Zimbabwe, total bad governance. I used to be external examiner in Zimbabwe going back 20 years ago. And I mean, it's a fantastic country, but it was ground down by decades of mismanagement, corruption, poor governance. Nigeria, very wealthy country, but in northeastern Nigeria here, Boko Haram, major issues, major conflict. So the regions of the world where you have problems and where food security, where nutritional issues, humanitarian emergencies are a real issue, is in these regions where you're looking at unstable conditions, basically unstable conditions, very often exacerbated by natural conditions like droughts. For instance, eastern Ethiopia has a bad drought, northeastern Kenya and so on. Now this is a more kind of a similar picture. This is again from the same famine early warning system. The only reason I included this is that you can see that across 45 countries at the moment, 76 million people now are in a humanitarian emergency situation. That is a huge number. That's gone up more than 60% since 2015. And the vast bulk of them are actually in sub-Saharan Africa, okay, because of instability and war and conflict. And that's exacerbated by natural phenomena like droughts. Unfortunately, you know, the climate change models predict that the worst effects of climate change will be in these regions as well. And there's another parameter. And I'm sure you're probably aware of this. These are the most recent data from the United Nations in terms of population projections. What do they show? They show that the one region of the world that's really going to grow this century is Africa. Currently fairly underpopulated, about 1.2 million. There's as many people in India as that. It's about 1.2 million people in India as well. 1.3 in China. But look what's going to happen in Africa. By 2030, 1.7. By 2050, 2.5. These, incidentally, are the median projections. It might be higher. Okay? And by the end of the century, 4.5 billion people. Now, you have to ask what's going to happen in a continent that's going to experience severe climate change disruption, okay? And currently has major levels of conflict and instability in terms of nutrition against that scenario. And people are very worried about this. You know, this is a serious issue. Now, undoubtedly, with good governance, these countries can easily deal with that population rise, you know. Well, maybe not easily, but they can do it. But with bad governance and conflict, they're not going to be able to do it, okay? Now that brings me to the final bit, the humanitarian assistance. And one of the things the United Nations has done since 1961 has been to run a World Food Programme to deal with humanitarian catastrophes and disasters, and to intervene with emergency humanitarian assistance for people that require it, okay? Particularly small children and particularly women, okay? And currently it's providing assistance to greater than 80 million people in 76 countries, okay? These are the data for 2016. Now their budget is about 6 billion, almost 6 billion. Now to the US's eternal credit, and you guys should take credit in it, over 2 billion of that money comes from the US taxpayer, okay? And that doesn't even include all the money that US spends then on other humanitarian assistance through USAID and other NGOs and so on. So the US provides an awful lot of this money, okay? It is the major donor, followed by the European Union, including Ireland. Where does it go? Well, mainly to sub-Saharan Africa, okay? West Asia, small bit in Southeast Asia and so on. Now, as I said, these are nutrition-specific interventions. Nutrition-specific is where you're dealing with an immediate problem by giving humanitarian assistance. Okay? The long-term solution basically involves eliminating poverty, reaching all these sustainability development goals up to 2030, but in the longer term ensuring peace and stability, good governance, and then people themselves will do everything else. People on the ground will do everything else as they have done elsewhere in the world. Even in Ireland, we were a very poor country. If you go back to when my father was born in 1930, it's an extraordinarily poor country. Okay, there were high levels of deprivation, but we've been, okay, we complain about our governance, but geez, I tell you, they're not that bad when you go see what's happening elsewhere in the world, you know. And we've had peace and stability, and we've basically developed a nice little country. It's a great place to live, you know, apart from the weather, you know. But the short-term issue is you need humanitarian assistance, and that's where the World Food Programme comes in, USAID, Irish Aid, other national aid programs, NGOs. Now, what do they dispense? Most of what they dispense is what they call commodity foods like rice, canned foods, maize, dried beans, sorghum, vegetable oils, all that kind of stuff, sugar. But a key area that they get involved in is specialized nutritious foods, okay? And that's where the product that we're developing and that other products they've used for decades now fall, including the Fortified blended foods, okay? Now these are foods basically that, most of them are actually produced in Western countries. The WHO or the WFP have a procurement procedure where they basically try and source the fundamental commodities like pulses, grains in the local country, because that benefits the local country, the money goes there. But for the special nutritional products, they have very high specifications, which are very hard to achieve, you know, in terms of development of those products and manufacture those products in very poor countries. So a lot of those tend to come from Western Europe, from the US, and then they're dispensed basically where they're needed. Okay. Now it shows basically their procurement. Note that the US gives most of the money, about a third of the money, but a lot of the procurement doesn't happen here. Most of the US procurement is actually through USAID, okay, not through WFP. Western Europe, they're nearly 270 million, okay, including a lot of these specialized nutrition products, okay. All right, now, so this is where most of the aid goes, as we said, to Africa. Some to Asia. The global food aid donors, as we said already, mainly the US, EU, Japan, and a few other countries. Okay. Now, in terms of the range of products, WFP basically have ones that are very simple and easy to, you just dispense maize or dried beans or rice or whatever. So, you know, those generally they find in the countries, the poor countries, and buy them and at the market prices and then dispense them. But the ones that are much tougher to make, like for instance the Fortified blended foods and ready-to-use supplementary foods, which is another category of fortified food, Those tend to be much more expensive. You can see there the type of product we're developing there is about $1,100 US dollars a metric ton. Those tend to be developed because they have very high specifications in Western countries. Okay? Now, the main product, these are the different categories, but the main one that we're focusing on are the fortified blended foods. And the key one is something that WFP, World Food Programme, and other humanitarian agencies have used now for many, many decades, which is Super Cereal Plus. And it's made with either maize or wheat or rice. Maize, you can have a version with maize or wheat or rice. To that you add soya as a protein source, about 8% milk protein, some sugar, some oil, and you fortify it. You fortify it with vitamins and minerals, the kind of vitamins and minerals that people are likely to be deficient in, like iron, okay, like zinc, okay, like vitamin A. They're fortified. Now, these products are difficult to reach the specifications. They're very high specifications in terms of hygiene, cleanliness, composition, and so on. And they've basically used that kind of product now for 40 to 50 years. Okay? You give about 200 grams. They're focused primarily on small children, because small children, as we explained, is what you want to deal with in terms of nutrition perspective. The child is supposed to consume a certain level. They have specifications in terms of composition, about 17% protein, about 23% of calories from fat, including essential fatty acids, and they meet the recommended nutrient intakes, and that's a term that means protein digestibility corrected, amino acid score, which basically means it's good quality protein. And you intervene in the child for about 60 to 90 days to try and improve the child's nutrition, get back on track. The products have very high specifications. As I said, they have to have a minimum shelf life of 18 months. Okay? They're dried products, and they're distributed primarily in 1.5 kilogram bags. Okay? That's the type of product now we're trying to make. Okay? That's just described it there. Okay, so there, as I said, blends. The premium ones are blends of partially pre-cooked cereals, soya, milk powder, vegetable oil, fortified with vitamins and mixes. Now, the key thing is they're distributed dry. The mothers or the caregivers take the product, mix it with water, and boil it up as a porridge. It's a porridge. And you feed that porridge to the child. Now, the boiling is important because even if the water is dirty, you kill anything in it. And they're generally used in humanitarian emergencies or supplementary feeding programs, okay, to deal with moderate acute malnutrition. And this is the kind of situation. Now, they've used the same kind of products for 40 to 50 years, and there are limitations to them, serious limitations. You've got to cook, so you need fuel, right? But apart from that, one of the key issues with them is they're too viscous. When you mix them the way you're supposed to and make the porridge, it's too viscous. The porridge is difficult for the child to eat, and very often the mother will over-dilute it, so they get undernourished because they're not getting enough of it. It's too diluted, so the child will actually accept it and eat it. There's anti-nutrients in some of the cereals called phytates that bind some of the essential minerals, make them less available. They can be very unstable. Sometimes during storage, remember a lot of these countries are hot. Some of the ingredients, like soya, for people that don't normally eat soya, can be culturally kind of they're not happy about it. And because, food sharing occurs, very often not all the product goes to the children. Okay, now WFP has known that for years. Everyone's known it for years. So one of the things the Irish government did there a few years ago was they issued a request for grant applications, basically to come up with novel fortified blended foods. And Nora and I, one of the joys of academic life, particularly in countries like Ireland, where the university system is seriously underfunded, is you're under huge pressure to bring in grant money. Okay, so we wrote a grant and got it funded for 4 years to develop a novel fortified blended food. And it's a significant grant. Ourselves and some partner in the State Research Institute, both of the money comes to Nora and myself in this. Okay. All right. So to develop a novel fortified blended food with enhanced nutritional quality for WFP, using Irish-sourced ingredients, because the Irish government is interested in the longer term, putting it bluntly, in selling this stuff to WFP. It's all comes back to that at the end of the day. Now, one of the problems is that the existing products are you know, they're unusual for a lot of people. So what we came up with the idea of doing was making a product, a fortified blended food based on a traditional product that's widely consumed in the areas of the world where you're most likely to have a problem, which is sub-Saharan Africa and West Asia. Okay? And as it turned out, about 25 or more years ago, I had done a project on a product like that called kishuk, which is a traditional product that's been eaten for thousands of years in that part of the world. It's a fermented milk cereal blend, okay? And it's been made for millennia, okay? And lo and behold, it turns out it's a dried product, and when the people that made it for millennia wanted to consume it, they mixed it with water, they boiled it up, and they ate it as a porridge. Exactly what's done with the existing fortified blended foods. So bells went off for us, and we said, hey, look, let's develop a product based on this, you know. It's culturally acceptable and so on. So that's what we've done, you know. Now, as I said, I worked on this with a Lebanese guy, Adnan Tamim there. That paper, we published a review on it. We published 6 or 7 other papers on it based on work we did in the early 1990s, and then we forgot all about it. Okay, and the world moved on. We're chasing money in other areas, the joys of academic life, you know, which I've been doing for 30 years now. No, it's a good job. I worked for corporate America for a number of years. You make more money, but I like this better, you know. So anyway, the traditional kishuk, for instance, looking at how they make in Lebanon for centuries, is they take milk or skim milk or buttermilk, which is what's left over from butter manufacture. You cool them down, and essentially you make yogurt, okay? And then you add a grain to it, normally bulgur. Okay, I got to watch my time there, Peter. Bulgur, and you mix the bulgur over a period of days into the yogurt to get a fermented kind of yogurt bulgur mix. Okay, and as you mix it and you knead it daily for 6 or 7 days, and you keep it hot. No, that's not too hard in Lebanon in the summer. Okay, that's the ambient temperature. You end up with a ratio of bulgur to yogurt of about 1 to 4, okay? They add salt. Now, in the traditional process, clearly we're not going to add salt in our product. And they make it gets more dough-like as you go on, as you mix in more grain, and the grain absorbs water from the yogurt. And they make kind of nuggets, and then they dry them in the sun. Now, that's again something you definitely won't do in Ireland, you know? So they sun dry them, and then they grind them into a powder by hand. And they store that powder. It's incredibly stable. And then in the winter months when milk is short, they can take that powder, they can cook it up as a porridge, they might add sweet things to it or savory things to it, and they've eaten that for millennia. Okay, it's a traditional product. And there's variations of that product all the way across from Morocco through to the Middle East, through to West Asia, and even south of the Sahara. There are variations in this. This is a traditional product that's been around for a long time. People understand fermentation. It's culturally acceptable. Okay, so that's what you do. And the kishuk then is reconstituted with water, boil it to a porridge, the very same thing that's done with the existing WFP fortified blended food. So that was our idea. Our idea was to make the base product with the kishuk and then fortify it with the vitamins and minerals. But you've got to do 2 things. You've got to do that in a cost-effective way, okay, and a more rapid way than the traditional way, okay, and you've got to do it to meet the WFP specifications, which are very, very rigorous, okay. That's a food science project. Nora and I, our undergraduate degrees were food scientists. I work half and half between food science and nutrition for the last 30 years. Our colleague in the project is a guy called Tim Ganey. Tim and I were in the same class. I've known Tim for 42 years. We're like that. And he's a good food scientist as well. So we've done it, we can make it, and we can do it cost effectively, and we can make it in one day, okay? So we can make a product, just applying modern kind of techniques, which I won't go into because it's a technical food science. What we can make has very good nutritional microbiological qualities in its own right, very high protein content. You reconstitute with water, and then it's widely accepted in those areas of the world. People understand what it is. And we feel that it's ideal, you know, to fortify with vitamins and minerals. So we make our yogurt, we add the cereal. Now we're making it 4 different versions of it, with bulgur as the cereal, with whole wheat meal, whole barley meal, whole oat meal, We ferment them, mix up the base products, and then we fortify it, and that's what we've done. We've got all that far. So how do we do it? We take, for instance, bulgur, we mill it to a certain size, we ferment the milk or buttermilk, we mix them, we make the blend. Now the key to this is in the hydration. The traditional process, it takes 6-7 days to hydrate it to get the bulgur or the grain to take up water. We've that down to 1 day, okay? And we can hydrate it and make it in about a day, okay? Now it takes another day to ferment the milk and so on, so about 2 days. We dry it at low temperature, and then we mill it, and then that's our base product, and we fortify that, okay? So that's what we've done. We've done our cost analysis. Now, one thing we've done is we've benchmarked our product against Kishuk products. Nora and I were we've got them from different parts of the world. Nora and I were in Istanbul there a few years ago. We spent a happy week going around local markets and getting all kinds of Kishuks from all over the world. Istanbul's a fascinating city. If you ever go, it's about 16 million people. It's a fabulous place. Anyway, our product is very similar. I'd worked on this 25 years ago anyway, so we fortify it. We've done all kinds of analysis on it. We're continuing to do that. And the key thing is to make it less viscous, and that's what we're working at the moment, so that when the mothers mix it up, will it be too thick? You know, and if it is, they'll over dilute it, and we're working on all that kind of stuff. That's all technical food science. In conclusion, we believe it's a decent product. Whether it'll fly or not, who knows? You know, but this is a 4-year grant. We're doing the shelf life studies at the moment for the 18 months, and we're tidying up a whole lot of other stuff. So that's our project. That's what we've done. But the key point I want to leave you with is this will fix nothing in the longer term. The only thing that fixes hunger is in poverty, political stability, good governance. After that, people do it themselves, okay? People do it themselves. And the key group you really need to focus on are women and small children. Things go awry with the women and the small children, they never recover, okay? Thank you for your time.
The World Food Program will decide to buy your product. I mean, what competition is out there?
I would say small.
Really?
Yeah, I would say small, because we're not the first people that have tried to develop a better product. World Food Program basically have bought the same product for over 40 years. Part of the problem is that World Food Program is a decent organization, but they depend on donor money, okay? And the donor money comes from big countries primarily. And big countries have interests. See, a lot of the donor money sounds great. The country gives money to the United Nations agencies, but a lot of that money then basically goes back to the country to buy product that's manufactured in the country.
It's tied aid.
It's tied aid, exactly, yeah. So Ireland's a small country. We give about 40 to 60 million to WFP, but it's tiny relative to other countries, you know. So I would say, you know, small, but we'll fight on, you know.
Well, we've run out of time for Tom's talk, but I'm sure he'd be happy to meet individually with you if you have, like, walk over with him to Nora's lecture. One thing I should mention is that, I should have mentioned this at the very beginning, is that Tom's visit here and his talk, as well as Nora's talk, which I'll note when I introduce her tonight, is sponsored by the Global Public Health Program, by the Irish Studies Program here at the University of Montana, and by the Institute for Health and Humanities. So we're grateful to all those organizations for the opportunity to bring them here. And wish you well.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, and it's been a privilege to meet you. And always good to come back to the US, as I say, a country that is very close to my own heart. Thank you.